So what is a dynasty? A dynasty is a consistent amount of success within a small time window. That is an easy question for the average mind to comprehend. Something that's a little more nuanced is what exactly makes a dynasty great. On the surface level, what Jimmie Johnson did in the Coca-Cola 600 from 2003 to 2005 really wasn't that impressive. There was minimal change in that this was the same car, same track, same driver-crew chief combo, and same strong organization. However, this era of dominance still stands out. It sticks out not just because of the consistent levels of success, but rather the unique ways Team 48 achieved the gold standard of excellence.
Look at Jimmie Johnson, 3 wide through 3 and 4. There he is. Here he comes, Jimmie Johnson.
NRF Productions presents the greatest Coca-Cola 600 dynasty. Historically, a good Coca-Cola 600 for a rookie driver would be to just complete all of the laps and maybe get a top 15. This is typically what a good driver does, but Jimmie Johnson was a driver that was built different. In his Coca-Cola 600 debut, Johnson won the pole and dominated the race. Jimmie Johnson was Superman on that night. He displayed traits of strength and invulnerability, except on pit road. His kryptonite would be sliding past his pit box, which ended his bid at winning the Coca-Cola 600 as a rookie. As of 2025, this is the second most dominant loss in Coca-Cola 600 history. On this night, Jimmie Johnson learned just how demanding physically and mentally the Coca-Cola 600 could be. Now, for most mediocre to good drivers, they would see these failures and that would restrain them from achieving those levels of success ever again. However, Jimmie Johnson wasn't like other drivers. He and the Lowe's racing team saw the past failures as the key to unlock future success. This group was ready to turn the pain of losing NASCAR's longest race into future Coca-Cola 600 glory. In 2003's 10 Days of Thunder, the Lowe's racing team was feeling awfully prideful. Not just because of this beautiful Power of Pride scheme painted up to honor American soldiers that were killed in combat. Jimmie Johnson and Chad Knaus were confident that they could defend their home turf. Beginning with the 2003 Winston, Johnson dominated to get past the hump. So having a winning car in the Winston paid out more than just American dollars. On this night, Chad Knaus gained valuable information that he would apply to the 48 team's Coca-Cola 600 car. Jimmie Johnson was fast in practice. Unfortunately, the 48 in pole qualifying would not make an official lap due to an internal engine problem. So this improbable failure was unfortunate for Jimmie Johnson and the 48 team. For the motorsport fan, however, it would make the 2003 Coca-Cola 600 worth the emotional investment. You had Jimmie Johnson with the fastest car in the Carolinas starting shotgun on the field. What more could you want to see as a motorsport fan? So as the green flag dropped for the 2003 Coca-Cola 600, Chad Knaus would play it conservative in this race. He wanted to make sure that he was on par with the leaders because tires in this race would be a valuable resource. Because of this, Jimmie Johnson would have to take the methodical, patient approach in getting to the front. During the first green flag stint of the race, Jimmie Johnson showed the horsepower he had in the 48 as he worked his way all the way up to the 11th position. By the midpoint of the race, Chad Knaus and Jimmie Johnson were locked in. Jimmie Johnson, radioing back to Chad Knaus on the conditions of the car, said, in quotes, "It's perfect." That could also best describe how the 48 team executed on this night. Jimmie Johnson displayed great maturity as a driver. Chad Knaus made the right calls on adjustments. Then you had the 48 crew busting out 13-second pit stops. The 48 team was on it, and ultimately they would be granted the luxury of clean air. On lap 242, Jimmie Johnson took the lead at exactly the right time. Shortly after, the state of North Carolina would be engulfed in rain. Despite a possible window to get the race in, NASCAR officially called the 2003 Coca-Cola 600 after 414 miles, meaning that Jimmie Johnson would be awarded his first ever crown jewel victory. NASCAR's decision to call the race warranted mixed results in the garage. You had guys like Chad Knaus that were singing in the rain, hoping that it would downpour for as long as humanly possible. There were others that were surprised by this call, even the race winner, Jimmie Johnson. Many drivers, fans, and teams felt that they could go back racing, which ultimately dampened the mood of the race. Due to the controversy, it really overshadowed the fact that this was a breakout race for Jimmie Johnson and Chad Knaus. This race in many ways legitimized the pairing because while the weekend didn't go to plan, they still executed to absolute perfection. Unfortunately, the sour ending to this race really overshadowed the bright spots of the 48 team's victory. The critics weren't stunned. Jimmie Johnson obviously wasn't considered a real Coca-Cola 600 champion, and he should just put on the Mickey ears, bro. The 2004 running was the opportunity for Jimmie Johnson to make his haters as silent as a mouse. Something he had a great chance of doing as a third-year driver and the defending champion of this race. Jimmie Johnson, with this experience, understood the physicality of the Coca-Cola 600 and hoped to build up a thick notebook that he could use in this race. However, in the NASCAR All-Star race, the Coca-Cola 600 dress rehearsal, the 48 got severe crash damage on just lap 12 of the race. Because of that, Jimmie Johnson and Chad Knaus didn't learn much about their car considering the less than ideal aerodynamic conditions of their piece. Now, did this impact the 48? Not at all. Chad Knaus was validated a year later when Jimmie Johnson won the pole for the Coca-Cola 600. On pole qualifying day alone, a great deal of stress would be off of Jimmie Johnson's shoulders compared to 2003. Jimmie Johnson had the clean air, and that made him dangerous. In the race's first 295 laps, Jimmie Johnson led 252 of them. If this race were black and white, you could just call it a night and hand Jimmie Johnson the trophy. The only driver that had remotely close to the pace of the Hendrick number 48 was the Yates 38 driven by Elliott Sadler. Jimmie Johnson was clearly the class of the field, especially on the long runs. However, the Coca-Cola 600 is not black and white. Throughout its history, the Coca-Cola 600 has been a fluid race, and 2004 would be no exception. This would be a tale of two races, as there were more than double the cautions in the last 100 laps of the race than the first 300 laps. Jimmie Johnson, having already proven that he is the class of the field on longer runs, now needed to excel at the shorter runs. To make things more difficult, this would split the strategy. Some teams took 2 tires while Jimmie Johnson decided to get the 4 fresh Goodyears. Jimmie Johnson was the furthest back in the field that he had been all night. This final run of the race would be able to tell us a lot about Jimmie Johnson. Could Jimmie Johnson, on a shorter run of the race, chase down the cars on older tires with less than ideal air? Or would this show that the 48 was only a caliber car because he had the clean air and track position the entire race? On the second to last restart, Jimmie Johnson was determined. In what was the big move of the race, he threaded the needle between the 9 and the 31. Laps later, he overtook Jamie McMurray and never looked back. It wasn't easy considering that there was another caution due to the 12's engine turning into a grenade. Regardless, in one of the most convincing ways imaginable, Jimmie Johnson became a legitimate Coca-Cola 600 champion. As of 2025, Jimmie Johnson's 2004 performance in this race ranks as the 4th most dominant Coca-Cola 600 win. When we're talking about the legacy of Jimmie Johnson's 2004 victory, it was more than just shushing out the haters. On this night, the 48 displayed old school dominance both on the long run and the short run. The competition knew that Jimmie Johnson was both dominant and dangerous. With this victory, Jimmie Johnson was in the position to chase NASCAR history in 1 calendar year's time. Prior to 2005, in the history of the Coca-Cola 600, no driver had ever achieved a three-peat. Icons of NASCAR like Buddy Baker, Neil Bonnet, Darrell Waltrip, Dale Earnhardt, and Jeff Gordon all came up short. With a Blue Jacket-esque performance in the 2005 Coca-Cola 600, Jimmie Johnson could outdo all of those NASCAR Hall of Famers. So Jimmie Johnson had a lot of confidence going into this race, and rightfully so. Jimmie Johnson was the two-time defending winner of the Coca-Cola 600. At the 1.5-mile intermediates in 2005, Jimmie Johnson had an average finish of second, which included a victory at Las Vegas. Then, Jimmie Johnson was heading to a track that was his playground. The Charlotte Motor Speedway suited Jimmie Johnson and Hendrick Motorsports, which was showcased immensely in the Coca-Cola 600. Teammates Kyle Busch, Jeff Gordon, and Brian Vickers combined to lead 202 laps. However, none of them would finish inside the top 25. The reason being was that the 2005 Coca-Cola 600 was a race of survival. This race had 22 cautions, which, as of 2025, is a NASCAR Cup Series record. With the chaotic nature of this race, there were many times where Jimmie Johnson felt down and out. In Chad Knaus' recollection of the race, the 48 had an alternator issue mid-race. Fortunately, they were able to change the battery and not lose a lap. Having a record amount of caution certainly helped keep the 48 in contention. Entering the race's final restart, the 48 was positioned well to win the race as he had the fresher tires amongst the top 5. To win a record-breaking third Coca-Cola 600, Jimmie Johnson would need to overtake 3 cars in 5 laps. As the race went back green, the 48 made quick work of both the 12 and the 99. Bobby Labonte was now the only person that objected to a Jimmie Johnson Coca-Cola 600 three-peat. Jimmie Johnson was phenomenal as an offensive driver, but Bobby Labonte matched with an elite defense. This was truly a battle of Goliaths, and it looked like the 18 was going to prevail. On the final lap down the backstretch, the 18 had a couple car length lead to where Darrell Waltrip said, "It's all over, boys." However, the main strength of Jimmie Johnson was turn 4. As recollected by Jimmie Johnson, he felt that if he could get to Bobby Labonte's quarter panel, then he knew that he was going to win the race. In a remarkable display of talent, Jimmie Johnson sent it in and muscled his way to the outside of Labonte coming off of turn 4. The rest is forever enshrined into NASCAR history. So the 2005 Coca-Cola 600 was absolute cinema. The longest race in event history didn't just produce the closest finish. Jimmie Johnson became the first and currently only driver to win 3 consecutive Coca-Cola 600s. So, what did the fans think in seeing Jimmie Johnson achieve greatness? Well, they booed him and showered him with beer cans. However, in the words of Dale Earnhardt, don't worry about the booing. Fans knew who Jimmie Johnson was after his legacy drive to win the 2005 Coca-Cola 600. Jimmie Johnson's Coca-Cola 600 dynasty is the greatest in the race's history. This isn't just because he achieved something that 5 NASCAR Hall of Famers failed to do. Every single race in this dynasty saw Jimmie Johnson and Chad Knaus elevate their greatness. 2003 was all about patience and overcoming past demons. 2004 tested the 48 performance-wise, no matter if it was the long or short run, day or night, clean or dirty air, the 48 was the best car without a doubt. Then in 2005, this was the event where Chad and Jimmie were kicked and pushed down by NASCAR's most demanding race. Still, Jimmie Johnson and Chad Knaus proved exactly why you never count out the 48. So when it comes to a dynasty, it is a lot of success within a short amount of time. When it comes to a great dynasty, look no further than Jimmie Johnson's mid-2000s dominance in the Coca-Cola 600.